There it is. Got my coffee. Sorry, you haven't had yours.
No coffee yet.
This might be a Toby Talks More Than Robert episode. I think that's probably that might be the norm, actually. I don't know. I've never timed it. No, I've never timed it.
They time out the presidential debates, like who talked the most.
That's right.
Like that. We didn't have a timer.
Or we should have like the chess, like you tap when you tap, you have a certain amount of time, and you tap it, and then make sure that you don't exceed your time.
No, I get to tap it for you.
Yeah, I don't know. You get to tap it to make me shut up. We could have switching on the mics that make one mic cut out if you tap it.
Yeah.
We're the theme today, and I don't have any anecdotal kind of stories that I'm going to start with. I just jump right into the what we're going to talk about. Life in a box is probably what I'm going to title this. Do you remember? I don't know. So for me, it was going to the DC Zoo. Going to the zoo. I don't know if you had a zoo close by or you guys traveled. You were eastern shore of Maryland.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, a
like
zoo
field
around
trips and stuff. We would go.
Did you ever go to DC?
The National Zoo?
Yeah. I just zoos in particular. I remember, and it has been kind of this kind of common feeling leaving a zoo or being in a zoo. It was so cool seeing all these animals, especially in the middle of DC. But the one theme, the thing that I remember most people saying when you go to a zoo is, "Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad to see these wild animals, Bengal tigers, silverback gorillas." In DC, it's funny. The DC Zoo, they actually have the orangutans can climb over top of the walking path. Like there's cables look like power lines, and so they have the whole circuit of these cables that they can climb. But anyway, all that said, seeing wild animals not in the National Geographic kind of settings, but in a cage, is kind of, it's sad, right? And so the transition from that, I kind of raised it the other day. I think I was dealing with Oswald Chambers, and he was talking particularly about having a perspective of God that is a proper perspective of God, and it's almost impossible to do that without really observing the expanse of creation, right? How do we visualize an eternal God if we can't look into the expanse? And so I've been thinking a lot about how much time I spend outside, how much time I spend looking into the sky. And I thought, wow, there is, and I mentioned it to the young adults the other night, there's almost always, it's 99% of my day. Is it 99? It probably is, that there's a ceiling above me.
Yeah.
And you could say, Toby, what's the point? Why is that a problem? It is a cage. I mean, it is our own, we created it. It's something that I've, I don't know if you ever think about that? How much time you spend indoors versus outside?
Yeah. You just go about your day and you're inside working. You come home, you're inside for dinner, and you get ready for bed. You're inside. You get up, you do the whole thing over again. Yeah. I mean, I know with my kids, we're consistently like, go outside and play. Go outside and be outside. Enjoy the outside. It's particularly when it's warmer weather. But we do. We spend most of our time in our own environments that we create for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious. I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic or say, "Oh, that's a terrible thing." But I think what it does is it does change our perspective. It changes our perspective of the world when we don't, or at least changes our perspective maybe of eternal things or things bigger than me, even if it's totally subconscious.
Are you saying just more as just being outside in general, or being outside like your usual boundaries?
So I'm speaking literally first, like the physical space that we inhabit.
Yeah.
I'll say one of the things that I enjoy, I absolutely love, is mowing the grass.
Yeah, me too.
For me, I think it's because it's nice straight lines, keeping things neat, making things tidy, and just making things look good. But I think a lot of it is just being outside under an open sky. I think that makes a big difference. And I don't know, I'm happier when I've spent time outside. I know that there's something about, I'm sure there's psychological studies. I know there are. And even physical ones, like our physical bodies do better when we spend time out of doors. And
grounding.
The whole touch grass thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, that expression, it used to be knock on wood. Well, that was a different expression, I think, different meaning. But the whole touch grass, I've heard it a lot just recently.
Really?
Yeah, I know. I didn't grow up here in touch grass, but what that means is that grounding. It's that kind of getting some type of grounding, kind of coming back to like a reset almost. Touch grass, and so I was just thinking the other day. I thought, it's funny because one of the problems, one of the struggles I have with my kids is when we leave the house, I'm like, get a jacket, put a coat on. And the reason why they don't is because they're never exposed to the elements when we're going to go somewhere. They run from the house, a heated house or an air-conditioned house, jump in the car.
Yeah.
We go someplace, we run inside the church.
Yeah.
We jump back in the car. Yeah. And so in these boxes, and I could, people might say, Toby, why are you even focusing on this? Because I think there's something to it. I really do. And so that literal scenario that plays out in our lives and the way we kind of live, I think, consciously or not, affects how we see the world, interact with the world. I remember, I'm sorry, I know I'm going on my own little trip here, but do you remember, I don't know if you saw during COVID when everything shut down, there were pictures of Indian towns in India, on the borders of India, or Nepal, one or the other. Maybe it was like Kathmandu or something. I can't remember where it was. But all of a sudden, in decades, they hadn't seen the Himalayan mountains, right? They had been shut in with smog and smoke and all the effects of an industrial city, but everything shut down for COVID. And several weeks later, the Himalayas appeared in the distance.
Oh, wow.
And it changed everyone's perspective of, the Himalaya, they're right there. I mean, these mountains that they literally hadn't seen them in decades. Hadn't been in view.
Yeah.
And so just understanding our place in the world, I think it's important to be outside. Mm-hmm. You think I'm overstating it?
No, I don't. I mean, creation declares the handiwork of God.
Yeah.
And I think, most, I haven't researched this to know definitively.
That's okay.
But
I'm not going to fact check you. Just say
someone can.
We'll take it as truth.
But I would say, the majority of our ancestors all spent a significant amount of time outside.
Yeah.
I come from a line of farmers, and they spend a lot of time outside, most of the time outside. Even now, it's a little more tidied up now than what it was even 20, 25 years ago. You've got GPS tractors and air condition and heat.
That's right.
Videos, everything. So you're kind of in a box even. But not all the time, and particularly, those farms that work with animals and things like that. I do think, I think for a Christian, I'm not saying, it's like, you have to have some kind of contact with the land or whatever, but the scriptures were written in a very agrarian society.
Yeah.
And so having some grasp or concept of that, I think, is really important.
A lot of contextual things in scripture that,
and it gives you this notion of trusting the Lord, because again, everything is so tidied up now. But when I was a boy, my farmers weren't as well off as what they are now, and so I can remember, there weren't. Every field did not have its own irrigation system, and so there was some risk involved, and so you had to trust the Lord with that risk. Now it's not like that. Everything's created in a very nice way, almost most fields have some form of irrigation to water everything, so you don't have to rely on storms and rain and that sort of thing. And then it's all subsidized. We can talk about the conspiracy theory of that, but it is all subsidized so much by government.
Not anymore.
And things. So there's not this trust. Yeah, maybe not.
A lot of things shutting down.
There wasn't this inherent trust in being outside, trusting in God, reflecting on, I'm just a small part here of a much bigger thing than myself. I think that's when you, like, for instance, see these pictures of, like, I forget what it's called, but it's where, like, they can kind of take a picture of, like, the whole night sky, and it's like shows all the stars and everything in the sky without the filter of city light or other things, where it's just like the stars, and it is it's a pretty amazing thing, and it really makes you feel like you're very small.
Yeah.
The Bible doesn't make you necessarily feel that way, but I think in some ways that's healthy.
Yeah.
This isn't, the whole universe doesn't revolve around me. It's not all about me. But there is a great big world out there that no matter how I die or when I die, that world's going to keep going.
I'm a blip.
I'm a blip.
Not even a blip. But,
but a redeemed blip.
Yeah, well, I'm valuable. I'm just not as valuable as I
like to think I
am. I took a picture. There have been a few times where I've been under the night sky that just took my breath away.
Yeah.
And one of them, I actually have the picture. I don't know if I've shown it to you. I've shown it to a few people since we traveled out west in 2021. My family did. And we were in Death Valley, California, and we spent the night there. And we got out quick the next day because it was 100 degrees at 8 a.m.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I took a picture of with Death Valley Visitor Center when we stopped in. It was 8 a.m. exactly and 100 degrees exactly.
Wow.
And we said, okay, let's get out of here. it's getting hot quick. But the night before, we had spent the night under the stars and ate outside. And we were in an RV, but we were in this place called The Pads, and it was like this abandoned, maybe an RV park or something like that, out in the middle of nowhere. Not a single person to be seen for miles and miles. And we're out there by ourselves, which was really, really cool. But the cool thing is we looked up at the night sky and the stars were just unreal. I mean, you can't describe it. You can see the Milky Way. You can see everything and it looks like it's cloudy. And the cloudiness is the stars in the distance that turn into this haze. And so what I did was I took a picture just with my phone.
Yeah.
Later, we were looking through the pictures, and when I zoomed in, I was like, oh my goodness, just digitally zooming in on the picture on my phone. Then I put it on an iPad and I'll show it to you. I wish I would have had it queued up. I would have put it on the screen, but you zoom in and you realize there's very little blackness. It's the more you zoom, the more stars you see. And this night sky was filled.
Wow.
And when I say filled, I mean, it looks like it's filled with stars.
Yeah.
You just can't see them until you zoom in. And I think it's a good segue and I think it's important. And I don't think it's accidental that our modern culture kind of pulls us in, draws us into a smaller and smaller place because, Brady and I talk a lot about how culture, if we're not careful, especially Western society, turns us into cogs.
Yeah.
Turns us into a cog in a machine that serves the purposes of a bigger, kind of a bigger purpose. But it's not God's purposes necessarily. It's usually other players. But pulling us down into a smaller and smaller setting and kind of us being the fish in the bowl, and you look at the fish and you're like, oh, poor thing.
Yeah.
And he's looking back at you saying, oh, poor thing. Look at it, But we bring ourselves down into a very small space. And then, well, we've talked about this a lot, but then it's not only just sitting in a room with ceilings above us and walls around us, but then putting ourselves into these spaces with, these little boxes in front of us. You said that when I said, let's talk about life in a box. And you mentioned the rectangular box that you were typing on. And I think then we pull ourselves down into even smaller spaces. And I don't want to always be the one criticizing, but I am always thinking and critiquing. I find myself, always saying, okay, is this the way? Just because this is the way we're doing it now does not necessarily mean this is the way we should be doing it. And so back to the night sky. Do you think it's possible? I'll ask you a question. Do you think it's possible to even begin to grasp an eternal God without spending some time looking up at the sky or looking out at creation? Is it if you raised someone completely indoors and never let them see creation around them, only created things by man's hands, do you think that would skew their perception of an eternal God?
I think it definitely skew it. God has ways of breaking through our barriers,
Right.
so I wouldn't say it's impossible to perceive God. But I would say it definitely skews it because Paul talks about, in Romans, how creation is the means through which the eternal God is known. So we ought to be able to look outside and see the orderliness of creation and the way in which things interact, and even the changing of seasons and other things that tell us there is a God who is a moral God, who is a God of order and other things. So, I think creation definitely enhances our viewpoint of the Lord and who God is. I think, kind of pulling back on your illustration of the stars, when you were mentioning that, I'm thinking of God's promise to Abraham that as the stars are of the sky, if you can count them at all, so your descendants will be. And, we go outside and we look at stars and we see, wow, this is cool. But when you're in complete pitch dark,
as Abraham would have been,
what a much different perspective. And, just...
you think he tried counting them?
Yeah.
if there was even, I don't know what numbers or numerals were like back then. Like,
I'd be like, how? Right. Okay, where am I at now?
Yeah, that's right. I lost my
I got to
place.
start over.
Sarah, be quiet. No, I think, and as much as, so I say, is it possible for someone to kind of grasp, and none of us can really grasp the expanse of eternity or an eternal God, right? But, and so my coming back to it, my original or initial argument would be that it definitely, I think it diminishes our view, and maybe even we get a little too self-important when we don't put ourselves in the context of a much, much larger creation. So the one thing I know for a fact that happens when I stand outside and look up at the sky, the night sky in particular, there's something about the stars, is it makes me feel very small.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, it helps me kind of contextualize myself a little bit.
I think two illustrations from Scripture come up to me. One, the guy, rich guy, who says, I've built these barns for myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to fill them. This isn't enough. I'm going to build bigger barns, tear those down, build bigger barns for myself, and fill those. And
eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
And there's a self-importance about what I'm doing with the work of my hands, how I'm building for myself. And then, the other illustration that comes to mind is Jonah from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And you think, there's the God is orchestrating the created order all around him. He's thrown into the water. God prepares a big fish that God has made in order to swallow him, take him back to Nineveh. And then after he declares, to Nineveh that God's going to overthrow it, he goes up on the side of the mountain and he waits, and God prepares a vine with a shading leaf over him. Then God prepares the worm to come and eat the vine, and Jonah gets mad. Why'd you do this? But I think the distinction is, in Jonah, you see this man who the created order, God is orchestrating the created order to get his attention, and he's realizing how I don't want to say insignificant,
Yeah.
but how he is just he is a piece of a greater masterpiece
Yeah.
that God is creating. Whereas the rich guy, everything he's doing with his own hands, he's basically saying, I'm doing this myself. I'm making this for myself. I'm building this for myself. I'm going to do this for myself. Whereas in Jonah's story, you have God who's using the creative order to help Jonah see, hey, I'm in control. I'm bigger than you. I have greater concerns than you. I'm pursuing you. I want you to know me, but I also want you to know that there are greater things in this world than just your perspective and your biases and other things, that there's something greater at work here. So I think in that sense, I know those stories are disconnected by testaments and by time, certainly, but I think there is some relation in the basic understanding of, we're sitting in a room with a lot of things built by human hands, everything built by human hands in this room, and so we can say, wow, look at this technology. It's amazing, microphones, and you can record and you can put it online. The world can hear it in 2 minutes after uploading it. The whole world is able to hear. That's just amazing and whatever. And, whatever sense of awe you have of that, walking outside and seeing what God has done, not only what God has done, but looking at another person and seeing what God has done, all to make us have that same, or even to a greater extent, that sense of awe and wonder.
Yeah.
That I think is really important. I also think, in Genesis, when God gives the creation mandate, to subdue the earth and exercise dominion over it, He wants us to be active and understanding and in pursuing and cultivating and learning and all of these things the way He's done. Yeah,
and I think it's interesting. I could become very self-important if I live too much in this room, because every single thing I didn't build it all, but every single thing I've placed in this room, I've placed in this room. It was me. My hands put those books on that shelf and put it all here. And so if I lived life in this room, I could think that the world is mine and I created it,
Yeah.
And I think, and that is the one thing, and I'm encouraging myself too, to get outside more and keep things in their proper perspective. And I think it helps us too, because here's the other thing is, when I look around, I think, oh, I had to put all this here and I have to maintain all this, and to make it work, it has to be part of me. I have to do all this. When I walk outside, I say, oh, everything's happening. Those trees are growing with no influence from me.
Yeah.
The rain falls, the grass grows, the birds in the air, and all these things happen in creation. The stars, the rotation of the earth, and I can watch the stars go across the night sky. And you think, all these things happen with no input from me. I'm not God, right? Yeah. And so going from the literal spaces in which we live to the kind of the figurative, like, what does it mean about being, in a box, living life in a box? I think it's an important truth for us to kind of remind ourselves that there is so much happening around us that we don't control, but that's okay. And then God affirms to us, don't worry about it. Don't even worry about your life. Don't worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat. Or, the birds don't worry about it. Yeah. They don't worry about it. God takes care of it.
Well, I think there's been obviously studies that are done, and I can't cite any specific ones, but I've read where it talks about being outside is better mentally for
walking through walking through the woods. Actually, there was a recent one. Yeah. Yes.
And so I wonder though, just you think about, if you take this room, for instance, and you do feel something, I think all of us, like our homes or whatever, I've got a responsibility to keep this up. I've got to keep it clean. I've got to keep it together. I've got to keep it fixed up, when stuff gets bad or, starts to fall apart. I got to paint it. I got to blah, 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 blah. And that can affect your mental space. But when you're outside, you see God's taking care of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
He is, like, as you were saying, He's taking care of the trees. He's taking care of the birds. He takes care of those things.
Right.
He'll take care of me too.
Yeah.
And I think to put us in our proper space, that we don't have to manage everything in every way, ourselves, that we're able to trust the Lord. And I think seeing the created order operate, and not only that, I think the preciseness with which things operate, the rotation of the earth, how we revolve around the sun. You revolve around the sun.
Sure, yes. And the earth rotates.
Yeah.
There's another one called precession. Have you ever heard of that? And we didn't, here's the funny thing. This is a total aside. The precession of the earth, I think it's precession, do you know the earth is tilted on its axis 23 degrees as we rotate or as we revolve around the sun, and the earth spins, it rotates. But there's also this, do you know the earth like a top is, I think it's called precession, is actually wobbling just a teeny bit. And it's over like 12,000 years it takes it or something like that to, and I understand that causes some problems with the age of the earth, because we can only see what's happened in the past 100 years that we've been looking at it, and so we can tell that the earth's axis is wobbling. Now whether it's actually been doing it for thousands and thousands, and what do you, no matter what you believe about the age of the earth, it is wobbling. And so it's just interesting that we can look at that and we can say, and here's the other thing too, is the further we look out, the more we discover and the more we realize that there is.
Yep.
And that's a really cool thing about not having ceilings above us. The further we look out, and Elon is obsessed with Mars.
Yeah.
Right? Why Mars? Look out further. Yeah. I mean, and Mars is cool, and I don't know why anyone would. I went through Death Valley and said, let's get out of here, right? I don't want to go to Mars. Why would I go to Mars? It'd be like Death Valley. And that's why we got too much.
I think that,
but I think it's just I think Elon, whether he's realizes it or not, he's looking for God.
Yeah. Well, I think there's this notion that, we've got to find other places to populate and all of this sort of thing, and the universe. We've got to find other places where humanity can live in the future. There's some belief systems behind that I don't know if he, I don't know what his, I don't think he's a Christian believer.
I don't think he's a person of faith at all.
But I think
one day he'll realize he's poor.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think for someone in his position to think through, even though I am the richest man in the world, as everybody else before the Lord.
It's just the world.
Yeah.
That's again, that's perspective. I'm the richest man in the world. It's just the world. Have you ever seen that video where it shows the satellite, or not the satellite images, but the telescopes, like the Hubble, and then the other one, there was another telescope where it shows the Earth getting smaller and smaller and smaller in relation to the galaxy, the solar system, the galaxy around it. And you think, oh, you're the richest man on Earth.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I don't know. Again, I don't want to dive and go off track here, but yesterday,
I'll get us back.
Yesterday was the first cabinet meeting for the new administration.
Sure.
And I just caught the beginning of it, which I thought was really interesting. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development gave an invocation to the beginning of the cabinet meeting at the request of the president, and it was amazing. I mean, I was thoroughly impressed. It was a recognition that we are your servants. We want to do your will. That we cannot do this without your wisdom. It concluded, in the name of Jesus, we pray. I mean, it was just what you would hope would happen in the halls of government, by people recognizing that we are really nothing without wisdom from God. No, again, I think the person who was praying the prayer was very genuine, and people like Elon Musk were in the room hearing the prayer, and it wasn't just a short, kind of slather prayer, whatever. It was actually just a heartfelt, someone who I'm sure is a genuine, true believer who prayed it. And you think the most powerful people in the world were sitting in a room, the wealthiest people in the world were sitting in a room, and every one of them heard the gospel. Again, not necessarily what we would say as Christ dying on the cross type of gospel, but the gospel in that I'm a small person and am nothing essentially without the grace, wisdom, and power of God through Jesus Christ. I mean, it was really, really encouraging to see. And again, how the people in the room live it out, that's between them and the Lord. But the fact that it was prayed in a room with wealth and power and privilege and all those things, and every one of them heard it and will have to reconcile with it, and to think today they're without excuse.
There's I think there's a model of that in we have some I know at least one El Salvadorian in our congregation, and I talk to him quite frequently about El Salvador and what has happened in that country.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is not unique to us. It's something that has been modeled very, very recently. That understanding that I'm just here to govern these people, and I mean, you think about it with Solomon. When God approaches Solomon and says, "What would you ask for?" and he says, "Well, I have to govern these people. I really need. I want to do it well, so I need wisdom." Anyway, and I think if you know anything about the story, and I'm sorry, this is another aside, but it's a fascinating story. El Salvador was kind of the armpit of Central America. Forgive me if that offends El Salvador and my brother Elias, but it was bad. I mean, drug violence was terrible. Terrible.
Yeah,
It was the most.
murder.
It was. I think it was one of the per capita. Yeah. I think it was one per capita. I think it was like some of the highest violent crime rates, not just in Central America, but in the world.
Yeah.
And then this man of faith is elected and makes drastic change. But the first thing, so if you've never seen it, Tucker Carlson interviews him, and I can't remember his name. The president.
Bukele.
Yeah, Bukele. And he's the president of El Salvador, fascinating guy. And he says to Tucker says, "I heard that in your first cabinet meeting you had prayer." And he says, "Yes." And he said, and Tucker says, "Why?" And he says, "Because we didn't have any good answers and we needed God's wisdom." And he said, "We stopped and we said, we need God's answers to the problems we're facing." And it's a fascinating interview. And I think we could say, well, look at us. We're America. Look at, oh, that's great. We're just following a really good model because now El Salvador is one of the safest places in the world now. There's so many things happening because they stopped, humbled themselves, and said, we don't have answers.
Yeah.
I think it's a great segue too about, we sometimes set ceilings, and that's the other problem with ceilings is it maybe even unconsciously or subconsciously disconnects us from God. Like there's not this there's a ceiling above us, and I think that's a really good example of a leader, of a world leader, a president of a country that said, I don't have any great answers, but I know God does, right? And I hope that that's also what's happening in our government. I would hope that's with every government. Every new president, every new cabinet, they would say, we don't have any great answers, but we know who does. I said it to somebody the other day. Someone was just telling me some issues they were having, and I said, I don't have any great answers, but I know the man who does.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me, and I'm gonna make an abrupt shift here real quick. I remember when I was young, runners would talk about the 5 minute mile. 5 minute mile. Yeah, that was a big accomplishment. I don't know when that was first broken through, the 5 minute mile, but I want to say probably the 70s. I don't know. Maybe it's before that. It probably was before that, but meaning like in competition and people actually timing it. And so that was kind of the ceiling, the 5 minute mile. And now I'm hearing literally within the past several months, I'm hearing of more and more and more and more and more people breaking the 4 minute mile.
Wow.
I mean, bunches of people.
Wow.
And it's really interesting to me how that happens. it's like the 4-minute mile was out of reach. It was something that was just a dream, in the past several decades. And I think it's been recent that it's been broken. But it seems to be and I think this is with a lot of things. As soon as one person who believes, I think I can break that. I think I can do that. I think, done right, with enough training and enough whatever, I think that can be, I can push through that. And as soon as one person does, then it's like this, all of a sudden people are like, oh, it's possible.
Yeah.
And then you see people following. And I wanted to kind of shift in like these, not just the literal boxes we put ourselves in, but the kind of the figurative ones and the ceilings we place on not just human accomplishment. I don't want to just talk about human accomplishment, but things that I think God would even stretch our minds and say, hey, listen, don't put me in a box. Don't put your life in a box. Brandy had this quote she shared with me yesterday, and there are two lives, the life we live and then the unlived life within us. Mm-hmm. The unlived life within us. And that's kind of it's an interesting concept, but it's sad to me when I think about the unlived life. How many, like if one person hadn't said, I think I can break the 4-minute mile, would it still be, and that if that one person hadn't done it, all those other people probably never would have. Yeah. Right? Or one of them might have. But I think, I don't know. And I think there's too many times where people say, oh, that can't be done. That can't be done. Right? And I think we create for ourselves barriers that don't need to exist.
I think obviously our growing up, our family histories, where we live, where we, our belief systems, all that puts boundaries around us in terms of, like you said, what is possible and what is not possible. And that's where I think, kind of relating these two sides of this discussion is, I think the Lord calls us to have an expanded view of things beyond our traditional box, if that's what we're calling it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking he talks about the lily of the field. He talks about the sparrow in terms of relate yourself to them. The Lord cares for them. The Lord takes care of them. They don't do anything. God cares for them. How much more does he love you? Mm-hmm. He loves you much more than these things. And in terms of our walk with the Lord loves us and cares for us. I think sometimes we put ourselves in a theological box. That this is the only way that God works, or this is the only way that God is going to influence this, or because of my, I've had this discussion. I do believe in divine healing. I believe in God's present working, but because I've never seen it myself, I can't believe for it, or I won't believe for it, or I'm just going to whatever. And I think, God calls us to have a dogged trust in his word. And we live in this reality. So I think again, to take your illustration of being in this room and then going outside and kind of having an expanded mind, I think the same thing happens. We live in this materialistic reality, and that's what we base our beliefs on,
right? Much
more so than what is a spiritual reality beyond the material things that we can touch and feel. And I get that it's hard to get there, because we God has created us to be in a material world.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard for us to have faith for things that tend to be more supernatural, more spiritual. And, myself, maybe as much as anyone else, I can be a bit of a skeptic sometimes when people maybe give a testimony or other things. But I think the more I study, the more I try to understand God's work. And the thing that keeps coming back to me, and I've said it in sermons and in Bible studies, is God never criticizes his people for having too much faith.
Yeah, right.
It's always you of little faith.
Yeah.
Why didn't you believe?
Err on the side of belief.
Yeah. So I think,
and you probably won't err on the side of belief.
Well, I think to err on the side of what's possible versus what is impossible. A virgin had never conceived before. That's impossible. And Mary says, "Be it unto me according to your word."
Yeah.
There's this dogged belief that what heretofore has been completely impossible now has become possible. And so, I think the excitement there is God, I think, has joy in busting our boxes.
I agree. And I think that that's something that we need to be very cooperative with, is maybe sometimes we start to say, okay, how can I start to maybe bust out a little bit on my own? And I think that would be asking for faith, help me believe, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yeah.
That's such a strange phrase. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. But everyone can relate to it.
Oh,
it sounds weird. And it sounds contradictory and paradoxical, but everybody can relate. That as much as I believe, I think I do. I need more.
Yeah, I think that guy in Scripture who utters those words, everybody who's ever been a believer says, "Thank you."
Yeah, that's right. That's how I feel a lot of the time. Yeah. No, and I think, I know that we need to stretch ourselves, but I think more importantly, we just need to realize that it's not about us again.
Yeah.
And breaking outside of those, the boxes in which we place ourselves, I think is I would compare it to someone, you say someone in a pit, and not able to climb out. Well, all you're asked to do is have the faith to put your hand in the air and let someone grab it, right?
Yeah.
You're not expected to climb out, and maybe we're not expected to climb out of these boxes in which we put ourselves, that kind of keep us small thinking and small believing and small aspiring and small dreaming and all this stuff. And maybe we're just meant to at least show enough faith to put our hand up and say, I can't break this through the ceiling, but I'm waiting for someone to break through the ceiling the other direction.
Yeah.
And so that's the belief that the ceiling can be broken. Like these,
My advice to a young person would be, be willing to stretch yourself.
Yeah.
Don't just, particularly in the younger years of your life and older years as well, but particularly during the younger years of life, you've got opportunity to fail that somebody 50 or 60 years old doesn't have as much opportunity to fail at that point. And
I would even challenge that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Because I'm sorry. The boxes we put ourselves in, even at 50 and 60, you think there are people that say, that's it. I'm just going to throw caution to the wind and I'm going to let God show me what he can do.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to challenge you,
but I do think a young person to say, hey, live a little with your faith intact.
Yeah.
I think that's the concern that I would have is don't throw your faith to the wind. Like, drive into Jesus as much as you can, but as you're pressing into the Lord, broaden your horizons around the world.
Yeah.
Don't set yourself in a place where you think I've got to have what the typical American dream is. Broaden the American dream.
Yeah.
How are you ministering to others? How are you interacting with other cultures? I think how blessed we are to be able to have someone you can talk to on a Sunday morning from El Salvador.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to interact with what's going on, in a government in South America, whereas, 50, 60 years ago, that would have been almost unheard of in a lot of ways. But if you don't broaden your perspective to embrace people and to welcome people, and I think that's really what the Lord did. He welcomed people in. And your life gets very, very much enriched by it. And it is a risk, and we're risk averse. I know I am. I'm pretty risk averse.
I want to go I'm really, and I mean this, but obviously it's going to be something that's going to take some effort. I want to go the other way as I get older.
Yeah.
I want to, because I know that when we started having kids, you start having kids and your family, and you want to, I want to protect them, and I want to do things. I can't be quite as daring as I used to be, but I don't want to settle into, now we have 2 kids out of the house and grandkids at some point in the future, hopefully one day. But I want to. I think Brandon is in the same mind. Like, I want to start going the other direction. I want to start saying, okay, I want to be less risk averse. Aversion is a funny word because it makes you think, okay, wait, yes, less risk averse. I want to kind of start saying, oh, we could do that. Why not? Why couldn't we give that up or go there and so one of the things I wanted to shift the conversation to, which is what I don't want to always be the guy that says, well, this is the problem I see in the world. Technology. No. Oh, your phone is making you dumb and it's making you, but have no good answers. As an employer, I don't like hearing problems verbalized to me in a kind of a whiny way.
Yeah.
Without some kind of, I don't like it in a whiny way, period, as a parent too. But without some type of solution presented. Hey, we're having a problem with this. Okay, what do you think we should do? Well, I think we probably should do this. Okay, well, that's great. But just hey, look at that. That's, there's a problem there. So I don't want to be that guy. And so then the question would be, what can we do to both literally and figuratively maybe broaden our boxes a little bit? And I think the one thing is, I know I need it, and it just sounds like a simple thing, and maybe people think it's insignificant, but I need to be outside more. I do. I mean, we do a motorcycle trip once or twice a year, and we sleep outside. When we do that, sleeping outside is a whole different experience. And we go camping in the summer and sleep outside. There is something about sleeping next to a running river that is just a whole different experience. And it really does. I feel like it is like the touch grass grounding kind of thing. And I think it's good. I think it's a good thing to be my second oldest son. He's the one that went on the trail for months. And there's something about being outside. It makes him feel alive, being outside and touching rocks and climbing on rocks and things like that. So I know I need more of that. And so I think that's a good thing. And I would encourage other people. I think that's probably, if you've never done it or haven't done it recently or haven't done it since you were a little kid playing in the playground, I think there's something to it for sure.
I think that's another thought here is be with people outside your age range.
That's a little box that we create that's not healthy.
Older people get together with older people and hang out with older people. If you're hanging out with some younger guys or young ladies,
it'll stretch you.
It will stretch you. And I think actually it's very biblical. Titus 2 tells you older women, younger women, older men, younger men. I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
It's to me, I like hanging out with my kids, with my son, my oldest son, who can be more adventurous at times, sometimes more adventurous than I would like.
Right.
But the fact is, it keeps me from being in a box I shouldn't be in as well.
Yeah.
He's seeing the horizon in a different way than I am. And I think that's exciting. I think spend time and helping other people chase their dreams helps you find your dreams. And so spending time, when you get old, I don't know,
I like that one, by the way. That's a really, really good one. Yeah.
It could be, I guess, like senior centers and all those things, old people doing stuff together. I guess that maybe that's okay. I don't want to criticize that overly.
Are you allowed to say old people? I guess you are. You did.
Well, I'm not. I know you're stepping into that.
I'm stepping into
but
it, yeah.
But anyway.
We both. That's funny. I just realized both of us just kind of set up, adjusted our posture when we were talking about old people. Yeah, I know.
That's what we document our journey into.
Yeah, our hair is going to get grayer and thinner as we go. Yeah, and that's the one problem with doing podcasts is you can look back and say, "Oh wow, I have gotten older." Because I looked young there.
Not since we started this one, hopefully.
No, I hope not. So the other things, I think the figurative part, like the stretching ourselves outside of our boxes, I think that is, I know I need to be just more, not just willing for God to stretch me and say, okay, whatever you would have me do, I'm open to it. I think, again, sometimes we need to reach up an arm and say, okay, I want to stretch myself. I want to do something more. And obviously, meeting with people outside of our age group, I think, is a really good one. But I think, just doing hard things, doing things that we say, oh, I could never, be careful of that expression. I mean, I would say be careful, really careful of that expression. I could never, or I would never. Oh, I would never be able to do that, or I could never do that. Well, if that's your thinking, you're kind of reflecting your willingness to try or willingness to be stretched.
Well, I think a lot of things that are like that, we have this concept of it being really, really big, and I could never do that. But when you give it a shot, you figure, okay, the big thing is just an accumulation of smaller pieces. Mm-hmm. And I'm noticing that we're doing some work at our house in order to welcome my in-laws to come and live with us. And I was thinking, it's a decent sized project, and I'm thinking, I can't do that. I can't lead that.
Right.
But the more I get into it, the more I realize, it's just an accumulation.
Just eating
of
an
several
elephant.
Smaller pieces.
Yep.
And there'll be hiccups along the way. There's going to be learning experiences and things like that. But it's an accumulation of a lot of small things with an end goal in mind. And I'm actually pretty excited about it. It's going to stretch my mind. It's going to help me to learn some things I haven't known before. And I think saying like, oh, I could never do that. I could never, whatever. You really cut yourself short.
Yeah.
It's exciting to try some things and learn some new things.
Yeah.
And I do think as we get older, we do become more risk adverse, and investing in some things and doing some things that are, different than what we would normally do.
Yeah.
Are important for our growth. And
Yeah, no, I was going to say it's funny that there was a book written years ago called "Do Hard Things," and it was written for a very young audience.
Yeah,
I think older people need it. The same concept, the do hard things, and a lot of people could say, "Oh, well, I've done hard things in my life." Well, that's kind of I don't know that we're ever done.
Yeah.
Until the day we're done and we take our last breath. So why not? Why do we find ourselves at a point where like, I've done enough? Oh, what? It was this expression the other day. I was talking about this concept with Brandy, I think, and the expression "good enough." I can't stand it. It's such a, that's good enough. That's good enough.
Yeah.
It's such a terrible expression. It's horrible. Because I think, well, at what point do we say, oh, I don't care if it's not any. I could make it better, but I don't want to. And that's basically, it's good enough. I could make it better. I could do more. I could stretch myself more, but I'm not willing to. I don't want to. So maybe removing the words and concept of good enough in my life is something I can do to kind of remove those figurative ceilings from above me and say, okay, I'm willing to stretch more. I'm willing to do more.
Yeah.
I think about the last thing I would say is like the story of Noah, right? God says to Noah, he does share his plans with Noah, but you think about Noah and you think about that was probably, of all the people throughout history, that was probably one of the most daunting tasks and realities that anyone's ever been presented with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna destroy the entire world, but I'm gonna use you to start over. And you think Noah took that and said, okay, how can I be useful? Hey, I just need you to build a boat for the next 100 years. 100 years. And you think about Noah, and I think, man, how many of those 100 years were, oh, I'm a little burnt out, you know? You think about that expression. Noah built a boat for 100 years.
And he was what?
He was
500 and some years old.
Yeah, he was 600 when the flood came.
Yeah.
And so for 100 years, he built a boat. And you think, okay.
Not near the ocean.
Right.
You know.
Right. And so, yeah, and all this, you think about, he's faced with this ridiculous reality that the earth's going to be, all of creation is going to be destroyed, you know, and God's going to use him and his family to rebuild. And he just needs to build a boat. He just needs to be faithful for 100 years. And so that I think, okay, then I think my little misgivings about, I don't know, that's good enough. Can you imagine if Noah would have said that's good enough? if he would have built the boat, not quite the way God told him to, and that's good enough.
Noah, all of creation is counting on you.
That's right. That's right. The rest of
this thing's got to float. This thing's not got to sink.
Right.
Everybody's counting on you.
Yeah, I mean, and while God did bring the animals to him, then, and it's indicated that Noah did the labor. Noah and his family did all the work.
Oh yeah.
And so I just think, okay, help me be a Noah. Help me be someone that says, okay, as big as the things that I've done in my life, and they're not that big, but I think I want to do so. I'm willing to do bigger things. I'm willing to say, okay, the 4-minute mile is achievable, but the thing about the 4-minute mile is it took a heck of a lot of work for someone to take it from a 5-minute mile to a 4-minute mile. You know, decades. And so I think, you know, it's obviously us cooperating with God is a big part of it. But yeah, I want to encourage people, because I want to encourage myself to stretch yourself. Yeah. Stretch.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I think on that note, we'll wrap it up. Thanks.